This is the e-learning podcast, episode number 48.
We typically work against our own operational systems. We try to put so much more in there than it can actually manage at one time that we're not absorbing and transferring, we're not working with the system of memory itself.
Welcome to the e-learning podcast from lmspulse.com. My name is Stephen Laddick, and I'm the director at LMS Pulse. My guest for today is neuroscientist Lauren Waldman, also known as the Learning Pirate. Lauren is a consultant and lead scientific learning designer on a mission to educate e-learning professionals on the brain in order to fix longstanding practices that really just get in the way of effective and psychologically safe experiences. In this deeply thoughtful conversation, we talk about what it's like to be a learning science designer, or someone who works on closing the gap between practice and research in education. We also talk about why, according to the science of cognitive overload, you might tweak your delivery to ensure you're working in favor of your learner's memory. We also talk about why it's so valuable to consider the brain's desirable difficulties, or that sweet spot of familiarity and challenge that makes for a sound learning path. We also talk about the often overlooked issue of sleep and the critical role it plays in encoding and the consolidation of skills. And then finally, we discuss what it would take to invest in safe learning environments in the digital world and experiences that promote real upskilling, confidence, and self-awareness in people's minds. But before we get started, a quick word from our sponsors.
The e-learning podcast is sponsored by the e-learning Success Summit. Learn from more than 40 experts how to teach, work, and learn online without being overwhelmed. Get your free ticket to the summit at elearningsuccesssummit.com. And lmspulse.com, your best source for news, information, and resources for e-learning professionals for more than 10 years. Get our free roundup of the week's top news at lmspulse.com.
Hello, Lauren. Welcome to the e-learning podcast. How are you today?
I'm amazing, Stephen. How you doing over there?
I always love how people I'm great, I'm amazing, whatever. I'm glad to hear you're amazing. That is fantastic. Where do we find you sitting today?
I am sitting in my living room in Toronto, Canada.
Nice.
We are, where you get to see your living room, where you get to see the park these days, and that's about it.
Hey, it's really interesting. Speaking of which, well, let's just go down that path really quick. I love this little time capsule that these recordings create. Right, we're recording this at the top of June 2021. What is the pandemic / COVID / lockdown situation in Toronto right now?
We've been pretty much in a cage for, I think, 10 months. So it's, it's been pretty crappy, to be honest with you. It's been amazing for scientific discovery and human behavior and, very interesting time. But here in Toronto, no, we've been on stay-at-home orders for months and months now.
Any light at the end of the tunnel, or does that, vaccinations, that kind of thing, or?
Yeah, they're rolling out. I don't think it's any, on the global scale of things, I don't think it's any secret, when countries mess up, and ours did. So,
you know what? We just got to own it. You got to own it. That's the thing.
That's it. It's like, that's how that worked. So, it was quite, actually, it's funny because we took a walk through the park yesterday, and, as a joke, we're walking through with a friend, and we see birthday celebrations, and we see, something else, first dates going on, and just evenings out and whatnot. And it just became this whole at the park. It's like, need to have a birthday? Go to the park.
That's
need to
right.
Be on a date? Go to the park. Breaking up with your spouse? Go to the park. So, everything is go to the park right now.
It's like, I don't know. I feel like that's a regression back to days before technology or whatever. That's what everything happened, anyway, probably not breakups, probably not divorce. Of course, divorce never actually officially happened. Anyway, let's not digress.
Yeah.
Lauren, you are the Learning Pirate. You are a scientific learning designer. I've been wanting to have this conversation for a while. We've been back and forth on email and just sort of text and those kinds of things. So this is going to be just kind of free flow. I love it. Before we dive into substance, just tell, who is the Learning Pirate? What do you do? What's your shtick?
What's my shtick? The summary is, have been in learning for a really long time. I love that I got a younger face. It's a very deceptive, but at least, it's been over 20 years now I've been in learning, and it was really just a slap in the face, to be quite honest with you. It was after I started off as an academic, global career, like when I was young, was in Tokyo, and started off as a teacher and sort of moved up the ranks of in structure, and was working with businesses in Japan, and sort of went into the quote unquote trainer world. And just kind of like the trajectory was really smooth, got into learning and development, had a really fruitful career, got to the height of career, and was fortunate to work in so many different places, and even in different countries. I worked on a cruise ship for a year and a half as a training officer, and that was like one of the best and most challenging jobs I've ever done in my life. But when I came back and I was looking at the institution of learning and within all the organizations, there was something just so instinctually and inherently missing for me. And it had already snuck into all of the designs that I'm primarily, I work in the design aspect of it. And I knew I was always doing something a little bit different, but I never knew, didn't know why or what. Sure. And then neuroscience came banging on my brain, and it was like, oh, that's it.
Okay, sure. Uh-huh.
I'm like, oh, so that thing that does all the learning and basically does everything for us. Never thought about it before in this way. And that was the game changer for me. 100%. It was, how have we not explored the brain in learning and then learning design? And the rabbit hole for me then just went incredibly, incredibly deep. So it was, I feel like it's one of those typical stories of, I discovered this, I quit my job. I did quit my job. But I became like this obsessive freak with neuroscience and learning about the brain. And then, initially it was all about professionalism. I'm like, I need to know this because I need to know how this is going to enhance my ability to design. But as that happened, it also became I'm learning so much about myself as a fundamental human, and how I behave, how I act, what's going on in there, how I can merge and join forces with it. It was just such profound, and still is, it's such a profound experience to learn yourself in this way. And then to be able to transfer it professionally. So my shtick is like,
give us one or two those top pieces of profundity, like that you find either when you're talking with other, your colleagues, like other designers, or, just instructors, or just, for lack of a better term, the layperson, when it's like, hey, my kids, they're not doing well in school, or, hey, I'm in university and I'm not, like, what are those top 2 or 3 things that you're just like, hey, try this, and this, or whatever?
I mean, as far as the educational system goes, I mean, none of us were ever taught any of these things, right? So it's like, we definitely need to go back and start inserting these into the system. As far as what are my top tips is, first of all, we typically work against our own operational systems. We try to put so much more in there than it can actually manage at one time, that we're not absorbing and transferring, we're not working with the system of memory itself. So we overload the system right away, and then it can, it either just fails to remember any of it, or it can only grasp onto a very small portion of what it is you were trying to insert there in the first place. So that's kind of like the first, we cognitively overload. Then there's the whole, working against the process of memory. So we know, scientifically, it takes time to encode a memory. It takes time to, and when we look at the varying type, it's either you're scaffolding, you're building on a network that already exists, or more challenging is you're creating a whole new one, which means, and this is, I like to show people what this actually looks like in, an MRI and a functional MRI, because you can see the actual pieces of your brain developing and growing while it's happening. And that's what happens. That's what has to happen for us to learn, for us to encode memories. So that level sets the sort of the premise of, well, you can't cram something in like all of us did. I did too. I would stay up for hours at a coffee shop the night before cramming, and it just doesn't solidify a memory long enough to sustain for the long term. So when we look at, that's the second piece, is if you really want to, we can't just say learning, it's learning and memory. Learning is only one piece of the puzzle. If you want to actually be able to utilize that, you have to encode, store, and then be able to retrieve that memory. And we miss that part in school, and we miss that part in design, because we don't allow for that process over the course of time that it needs to happen. And it's typically not designed very effectively either to do so. So
is this something that we currently are solving for with like spaced repetition, or with like what are we doing today, and how would we evolve that to encode things better, and what do we choose to encode?
Yeah, I mean, spaced repetition is definitely, it's a proven research theory that we know that absolutely 100% works. I think, spaced repetition and interleaving, and something, there's a professor out of UCLA who's been working on these things for over, a quarter of a century, Professor Robert Bjork, who has done immense amounts of studies on what he calls desirable difficulties. And spaced repetition and interleaving are methodologies that get us to the point where we can challenge the brain to fail almost. We want it to
so like break
errors.
it, like for everybody who hasn't heard it before, like give us the difference, like distinguish between interleaving and spaced repetition. What's the uniqueness between those two?
So spaced repetition is like you're just spacing your learning over time, right? So you're not, just like I said, you're not going in and doing a big cram session. So typically in an organizational environment, we're looking at, okay, go to this workshop for 4 hours, and go to this training or this thing for a whole day, and learn.
You're done.
You're
done.
You've
got it.
What? We paid all that money. Don't you know this? So it's taking that and breaking it down and literally spacing it out over time. And the reason why this makes sense as far as the spaced repetition goes is that we know that memory consolidation happens while we sleep. So it doesn't make sense that you could just learn something automatically within a day and it's done. The process has to, the brain process has to actually be complete. So we know the consolidation, which is really cool, because while you're sleeping, it's the only time, I love this quote, it's the only time that you're remembering and you're forgetting at the same time.
Take me to interleaving, but then I want to go back. I want to understand. This is the first time I've heard this particular piece, but okay.
Yeah, super cool. So interleaving is when we're challenging, we're sort of adding a difficulty into the brain by saying, so instead of, let's take piano just arbitrarily. I used to play piano when I was a kid. Now, when I was playing piano, they'd say, okay, you're going to sit down for the 30 minutes. You're going to practice your scales. And then for 15 minutes, you're going to practice your chords, and then you're going to do whatever. When we interleave, we're saying, okay, we're going to do the scales, but then we're going to jump to the chords, and then we're going to jump to this. So we are mixing up the practice. It's still within the same contextual relevance, but we're challenging the brain to encode in a different way. We're still doing it, but instead of going A, B, C, C, we're doing A, C, B, A. And we're mixing that up to create the difficulty for the brain in order for it to latch on. And in this way, we can observe our errors a lot more efficiently.
Interesting. And does that create relevance in the brain, or I mean, spaced repetition allows it to come in, and then, it's like, if you think about it, it's creating those grooves, or it's it's building those neurons, whereas is interleaving, is it creating a relevance where scales also equal chords, also equal melody, also like what am I characterizing that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, it's really just about the it's about taking the related topics, right? It's the related skills. So like if you go back to the piano thing, in order to play piano, you probably do need to practice your chords, you need to practice your scales, but we're learning how to relate those two. So we're not necessarily focusing exclusively on that one thing at one time. So it allows us to, it's definitely a more challenging way to learn, but it's also been proven to be a more fruitful way to learn, because then we can also understand contextually how we can transfer things in different ways.
Yeah, no, I've always seen that whenever, at least that's the way I prefer to learn, right? Where it's just like really get confused and dive into this bigger soup of what's going on, and then swim around, and then, sort of it starts to all make sense. But, that's just the way I like to do it. So. And then Dr. Bjork, you said, I've already forgotten the phrase because we have not done any spaced repetition on it.
That wasn't his. Dr. Bjork wasn't the one who said this, but it was a quote probably from a research paper that I read once. It said sleep is the only time that we're remembering and forgetting at the same time.
No, but Dr. Bjork had something about destructive learning, or
desirable difficulties.
Desirable difficulty.
Yeah. So I think it's basically it's a learning, that requires like a considerable amount of difficulty, right? So
effort.
If we want to improve, we want to effort. We want to insert the difficulties within the design, because that way we're able to, if you have the metacognitive awareness, you're able to say, oh shoot, I thought I knew that. I don't know that.
Yeah. Hey.
But we're inserting the errors in there so that it's almost a gauge and a measure for you to go, okay, yeah, I see what you did there. I know this, though. I caught you. Or we can catch the error later and be like, you actually didn't learn this. Let's circle back.
Wow. Yeah. And I, as most people know who are listening to this right now, I live in Mexico City, and this is it's a new move for our family. And so everything you're describing right now, I find in language learning a lot. I'm pushing real hard to up my Spanish game, and boy, it's like, as soon as I think that I've got the pattern about verb conjugation for whatever, there's a twist that's thrown in there, or, hey, I go listen to it in real life, and actually the way people speak is a little different than they teach in the book, or, whatever. So there's a lot of that going on. Really cool. Really interesting to hear the science behind it. Right. So like, this is why, the why behind what's happening.
It's really about, like, learning typically is very predictable, when we, in the spacing effect. And when you use something like the interleaving, or you inserting things like desirable difficulties, you're taking away the predictability, which is also an enhancement. The brain loves novelty. So the more novel you can make it, and it's a fun way, as if you're a designer of learning, it's a real fun way for you to challenge your own design abilities, to say, how can I insert this? How can I challenge the learner? How can I insert like a little trap, if you will, for the sake of their learning, but on the designer side of things, it acts as a gorgeous measure for us. So we can see, we can measure our learning more effectively once we're inserting these, and if you have the abilities to, depending on the systems that you're using, or the amount of people that you're working with, it's a great way to design, because you're not only helping the learner, you're helping yourself as far as measuring, and then being able to design even more effectively the next round.
Before I know we're going to get to the sleeping part, but now I have a next question, is because what you're describing right now sounds to me like what another guest has talked about is, putting an Easter egg in, but that's a reward, right? That's a, oh, wow, you've unlocked, in the next level, or oh, wow, you didn't realize it, but this is this guy, but it sounds to me like you're almost talking about a trap door, where it's like, oh, you think you got it, but actually, here it is. So am I getting that right? Is it different?
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. I'd see, I like that Easter egg though. I like that sort of, that analogy, it's like, we know that it's important to stimulate we can use reward response. We don't want to overuse reward response, because then that overflushes the system. We want, as far as like inserting, the dopamine hits, if you will, which I know a lot of people like to do. But this is really about, just making it that little bit unpredictable, so that this is going, oh, I didn't see that coming. I either saw what you did there, or I didn't. So, even with your language learning, you can do that. And language learning past a certain age is incredibly challenging. Our language centers are very primarily developed, by the time that we're 10. So between ages of 5 and 7 is a critical time for language development. So, for anyone's watching who's got kids, you want them to learn a second language. Get them young, because as we get older, it gets really challenging, because our brains are literally competing with other things that are in there, but then it's also trying to create new networks in space to create that new language.
Believe me, I totally understand that.
Lo siento.
Yeah.
Lo siento.
So first, take me through why is memory created when we sleep? Why is that a thing? Take me down that path.
Well, it's not created necessarily, it's consolidated. So what's really cool about sleep, I think scientists are still wondering, like, what the heck is sleep still, right? Like, there's so many studies on that, but the consolidation process is when the memory becomes a little bit more stable, right? So we're acquiring it while we are awake. But then the research is basically saying that during sleep, it's strengthening the neural pathways themselves. So what we know is that we don't remember everything. There are people who do, and they're not very common in this world, but we don't remember everything. So throughout our days, we're taking in so much sensory observations that our brain is really processing everything that's around us. When we go to sleep, it's then kind of going through and going, was that relevant? Do I need that? I don't know. Okay, that's gone. That's gone.
Mm-hmm.
But when we're learning, it's like we're solidifying, we want to hold on to that content. So it's doing sort of the reconciliation of what's been going on and what you want to move forward with. And then when we wake up again and when we start to practice, when we do the rehearsal, we're strengthening those pathways.
Mm-hmm.
So I just thought it was so cool. I was like, oh man, sleep. You remember and you forget at the same time. You sure do. That's so cool. I never thought about it that way.
For sure. Is there a way that someone, let's just continue down the path of language learning. Is there a way that I can mark, trigger, indicate, some way to myself and say, hey, look, what I'm doing right now for this hour during my tutor session, this is really important. And while, I'm not doing it, but, and so when I do go to sleep, my brain will say, hey, look, that's important. Let me leave it there. Like, do you see what I'm asking?
Yeah, I don't think it's a matter. I mean, we can't just say like, hey, brain, that was important. Can you hook me up tonight?
Well, that's what I'm asking. I'm like, is there a way to trigger that?
Help me. Yeah. I think that well, subconsciously, I think you've just done it. So, but I mean, language is a whole other beast. And, it's really, when it comes to language, you really don't have much choice but to keep rehearsing and keep practicing and keep doing those things. I remember, back in the day, I'm going to age myself with this. People used to listen to tape cassettes. It's like overnight.
See how much gray hair I have?
Mine's covered right now. It's there. But, they used to listen to these tape cassettes, like as a part, they thought like, if I just listen to this while I'm sleeping, it's going to help them code. Now I've never seen any scientific efficacy to that itself. I'm sure in some way, shape or form it would. But I think it's just, if even that, and I think if you tie it back to when you're learning and when you're studying is how are you not exhausting this so that when you've got the ability, for me, working memory is the gateway to long-term. So if you don't overexhaust that working memory, right, it's that opportunity. So focusing in on not the whole thing, I had learned Japanese when I lived in Tokyo. And that really did my head in. It completely did my head in. And it was all about, contextualizing, number one. And then my motivation was strong. I was meeting a lot of people who I thought were great and probably had some really interesting things to say. I couldn't understand a word that they were saying.
Right, yeah.
So my motivation was strong. But as far as had I known then what I know now, it would have been in the way I approached it. It would have been I'm not going to I'm not going to spend hours studying. I know that's not going to be conducive to my learning. I'm going to exhaust my cognitive load and it's not going to get in there anyways. I'm really going to consolidate and focus in on these few things and then let it diffuse for the matter of time, come back to it. So I think it's more in the strategy that really makes the difference. And that happens whether we're learning for ourselves or we're designing learning for others. It's very methodical and we have to be very strategic when we're designing with science.
So I want to kind of take a left turn in the conversation here. I mean, I love this. I could talk about neuroscience for hours and hours. We know so little about our brain still, right? It's kind of like, exploring the oceans or exploring space. It's just really amazing how little we still know about how this thing works. And this is our functional center. This is what why and how and what we operate on, right? And not language learning, but the language we use. It's my particular passion or whatever. I find it fascinating to listen to people, the language that they use and what they tell themselves and what they tell others all the time. So in that regard, what have you learned over the last 14 months as we've all either been at the park or been in lockdown? Let's pick one or two things about, what's been your biggest OMG moment, and be like, I think, we talked about a little bit pre-show about, what you want to see, but then also what's been the biggest, wow, this was unexpectedly awesome that you have seen over the last 14. Let's start with the challenge. What's your big challenge?
I think it was there's so many sides of this, when we look from the side of humanity, right? I think when this first started, I was like, on the phone with my behavioral scientist friends. I'm like, oh, this is going to be good. Like, this is a global case study, just waiting to, the pages of this are just coming and coming and coming. And then as things sort of progressed, it was, oh, this isn't so great, but we're learning a lot, right? And the psychologists came to the table, the neuropsychologists, and like all these, crazy, amazing people who I have the fortune to be connected with. And like, okay, what have we learned? Well, things that we already knew. We were never taught these things about ourselves. And because of that, we're now living in a space where we knew that mental health was definitely a problem beforehand. Now it's like escalated to the umpteenth degree. So it's the psychological factors, the behavioral factors of the human condition, which has now been revealed, which is quite beautiful because it's level set a lot. I think we've done a lot of level setting. So from a sort of a human behavior standpoint, it's done a crazy amount to expose our humanity and what we could and can be capable of.
Give me a specific of what you mean by level setting. Like what do you mean? Like we've leveled
we were all. This is the first time that we were all in the same storm together. And I think there's a quote going around, or a GIF or a meme or something that says, we've all been in the same storm, but we've been in different boats. So some of us have been in a canoe. I'm a Canadian. Probably been in a canoe or something. Some people have been in yachts, and it's all about how we have weathered this. But what we have seen is anything from people's abilities to be more resilient and even tap into things that they didn't even know. But on the other spectrum of it, it's, we clearly knew that people didn't have a greater self-awareness to be able to self-regulate when emotional triggers hit. And that I've seen a lot of in a variety of ways, from high tensions at the supermarket. I mean, go back to the very beginning of COVID, this whole toilet paper fiasco,
Sure. Yeah.
But think about it, like no one ever thought about toilet paper in such a way. And all of a sudden they were emotionally triggered by something as a fundamental human survival. Well, I guess toilet paper, you don't need it to survive, but some people really thought you did. So, So it's those emotional reactivities. And it's still to this moment is something that we're looking at. How do we help people to understand not only their operational systems of their brains, but now as we sort of try to reintegrate into what we're creating as a new normal, we're all creating it, is if we are not more self-aware and self-regulated, then we're pretty much walking around landmines of human emotion ready to be set off, and we don't know what those look like. Now, through research and through science and through audits and through all the things that we're doing with my team in particular, we're looking at these things, and we're looking at the levels of complexity of people who never left the workplace, people who have, and then what's that going to feel and sound like? People who are grieving, people who found comfort in this time. They feel more safe. They feel more psychologically safe because they've created an environment of safety for themselves. And now going back into a workplace environment, is not even a thing for them. They're like, I don't even want to get, like, I guarantee you 90% of the people on your Zoom calls, they're dressed from this top, from the top half up. The motivation to do the rest and to walk out the door to go for a commute is very low. So this has really taught us a lot about, our capabilities of humans, but it also showed our deficits. And there's a great opportunity to upskill and reskill on that level.
So that's, I'm glad you led me right to where I wanted to go, was if I'm listening right now and either I'm a education professional, an instructor, a designer, whatever, or I'm on the other side, right? I'm a learner or whatever. What can I do to begin to create either that self-awareness, be able to create that, those pieces that I need in order to understand my baseline, but then also understand, where can I go with that? What should I be, what should I be aspiring to in terms of mental health?
I'm a massive advocate for metacognition. Now, metacognition is typically framed in the sense of learning, right? And it's being aware of your cognitive processes. It's the thinking about thinking. I like to say it as like you get to become the audience to your own performance. And that to me is the key, is how do we become the audience to our own performance? And I think that it's not just about our cognitive processes. It's not just about our brains. We've got the brain, the mind, and the body, right? The brain is going to trigger, it's going to release chemicals that are going to trigger responses physically in your body. So how are you reacting, and how are you being aware of those as well? So how do we cultivate these skills? Well, in order to even have that higher awareness of like the present moment, you'll hear a lot of people say, well, go meditate, go do all these things. Well, it's not that easy for people. Meditation's not as easy as the books want you to, or the apps, or, any of these tools, because meditation requires you to really be in a state of present moment. And for most people, that's not so easy because we are distracted by multiple things at any given time. So when you learn things, what helped me when it came to this factor, I've got a very strong practice of meditation now, but it took me about 3 years to cultivate it. And I had to understand, oh, okay, wait, I've got these things, like these attentional networks. I've got 3 different attentional networks in my brain, and those are going to allow me to help focus on one given thing. Now, meditation and metacognition isn't necessarily about being able to focus, but it allows us to tap into the networks to say, okay, what's going on right now? And I can give everyone a really easy, a simple example of how I was able to not only, I cultivated my own skills over practice, over many years, but it's the awareness piece, which was really interesting. So just, over COVID, being in the supermarket, I was in the lineup for self-checkout, and there was probably about, I don't know, I'm going to say at least 15 to 20 people standing behind me who were not keeping their distance. And I started to, and I could feel the person behind me was close enough for me to feel, their energy, to sense them as being that close. Now I can instantly feel, because I'm in my moment right now, I'm like, my heart rate's accelerating. Sure. Okay. I feel that right now. And I'm getting nervous. I feel like I'm getting tense, but then it's my narrative. What's my narrative saying? I'm like, I want to turn around and I really want to give this person a piece of my mind. I'm like, get away. Yeah, like, sure. I can literally feel your breath on the back of my neck. Go away. But it's that higher moment of my thinking going, okay, if I do this right now, number one, I'm emotionally reactive. There's 20 other people standing behind him. What kind of reaction? Like, it's almost like setting off the dominoes.
Right. Yeah. Sure.
I'm like, what kind of trigger effect is this going to have? If I turn around to address this? So instead, what do? I stop, I regulate. How do I regulate? Breath, as simple as it is one of the most effective tools to calm the nervous system down. You tap into your vagus nerve and you just calm things down. I stop and I take some breaths. And then I can tap back into my logical and rational thinking. And I didn't turn around and I didn't say anything. I just, what I did do though, was I used a scientific effect. So I said, okay, there's somebody in front of me. I'm going to let them go further ahead of me and create
more space. Yeah, sure. You grew the pie. You grew the pie. Yeah.
And then it's going to be up to that person behind me. And I'm going to slowly inch. I'm not going to let this person get too much more closer to me. So I'm going to inadvertently send you the signal that this is what I am doing. And this is, before I turn around and go, please go away. So, that's just it. It was that awareness piece of, my body is getting tense. My internal narrative is going very negative. I need to regulate. I need to calm down. And I need to logically think, how do I want to navigate this situation? Someone who hasn't cultivated these skills, they're either going to shut down, or that's that whole, that's the historical fight, flight, or freeze.
Right.
So which are you going to be? And if you're gonna freeze, then you're gonna be stuck in that moment. If you're gonna fight, get ready to fight 20 other people, right, sure. Just in case. So this is a very practical sense of, how do we cultivate these skills then? How do we get these into the schools? How do we get them to the workplace environment? How do we internally learn these things ourselves? Well, first of all, I'm a big advocate of learn a little bit about your brain, just a bit, any bit. It's running the show, and I think once you have a better understanding of the operational system itself, you can really join forces with it. That's my language. Join forces with it. You'll never control it. Don't try, but just learn about it so you can join forces with it in those times where, you could be sitting in a meeting
Mm.
And, sometimes you say something, your mouth says something before your brain goes, you shouldn't have
Oh,
done
it
that.
happens but it also, the question I want to ask is, how do we, what's your strategy for in the corporate environment, talking to the manager or the leader and saying, look, your people want to understand the next compliance thing, or the the next piece of the next coding principle, or the next sales technique or whatever, but this is just as, if not more important. This is a meta skill that everyone is going to benefit from. Or in a school where you've got parents breathing down your neck, it's like, look, why are we not memorizing our multiplication tables this week rather than this, right? So do you have a go-to when you're talking with those individuals about why this is learning, right? This is incredibly important skill building that we all need.
I think it comes down to the fact that if we can all just raise our hands and be like, no one ever taught us that. No one ever taught us. Like, no one ever taught us, but look at the benefits that we get from having this. So unless you came with an operational manual to your own brain, which I know I didn't.
Yeah, sure.
We're not born with those, and we certainly don't get the pages to them as we develop. Is you start to understand, in an organizational setting, look at the ROI. Look at the ROI on the investment of humans, of the actual humans, and upskilling ourselves is understanding ourselves to be better learners, to be more productive. If we know how we can focus and use our attentional networks to focus more, and then you couple that with like that metacognitive awareness of, I know what I know, I know what I don't know, I think I know, I don't know, is you're able to pivot so much faster in that awareness. A typical organization, an organizational experience, like, could be, well, I thought I learned something, but then I'm sitting at my desk and I'm Googling and I'm YouTubing and I'm doing all these other things. I have to ask them, asking somebody was just no problem at all. But if you had learned it and encoded it properly in the first place, you wouldn't be wasting all that time doing all these other things. So to the organizations, I say, and I've said this very publicly, is you got to understand that your expectations on how fast someone can learn something and transfer it for your benefit is not realistic to the human process. Get to understand that time and money is always going to be a commodity in your organizations, but if you invest in the human skill process of it, you will get the return on investment exponentially. But we keep skipping over it. We just keep skipping over it.
Maybe a curveball question, but do you think that this would we maybe discover that when you find organizations that people love working for, this is a key factor? I'm thinking of like the Whole Foods culture. I'm thinking of all the fanboys of Apple, or and whatnot, where it's like, I love working here. There are organizations out there where you meet people and you're like, this has been my dream job and I really love it. Do you think that's a critical factor, that the human side is being paid attention to as much as hey, these are our skills and this is what we're delivering? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can tell you that from the audits that I've done, like it's definitely the companies that are doing really amazing work as far as the human stuff. They've cultivated that culture within it. And the ones that are missing the boat probably they got a little bit of work to do on that side of it. But, the other thing that we know is from the behavioral sciences is that motivation is it's very unstable. What motivates somebody, even this morning, doesn't motivate me the next hour. It's so unstable. So we can help people through their abilities and their skills more so than we can do through motivation. So if people are given that opportunity, and if they're given that, if they're given the opportunity to chase their curiosities, but then they're given the budget to also do it and the time, then it really changes. When we were talking beforehand, one of my greatest frustrations in the learning industry and learning and development teams is that they don't get the time or the money. They don't get the time or the money to upskill themselves in a way that will really help the company. And these are the people who are designing and trying to partner. And because of that,
So, before you go there, but so break that down for me a little better. Like, just like any department in a large organization, or let's just think, in higher ed, like, in K through 12, these are, I think of teacher in-service days, or, whatever, where you're supposed to be upskilling, but in a corporation where, okay, look, I've got a workforce of 50,000 people and I've got a department of people who are responsible for making sure everyone's being lifted up. what usually happens? Like we just assume that we have the tech and we have the skills and we have the design that we need, and it's just always going to be that way? Or what usually happens, and what's the better world?
I think and this, I can't speak on behalf of all organizations, but I think, the investment is typically put in the wrong place. They say, ooh, look, shiny new LMS. Ooh, AI, AR, VR. Yes.
Sure, okay. Uh-huh.
and it's the allocation of the funds. And then you take that a level. Okay. So you bought all this pretty new stuff. Do your people know how to design for it?
Right. Yeah. Do you know how to use it? Do you know how to work with it?
Or did you buy something that's even functional for the use of what you're trying to accomplish when you're looking at your learning initiatives? And there's definitely a displace between those two aspects. I saw that raging, especially in the educational institutions over COVID, beginning of the pandemic. People just ran and spent a ridiculous amount of money, millions of dollars.
Billions.
Well, when we add it all up, and you've got billions. And then it was, I turned down work because I said, I'm so sorry, but I just can't make this. You bought something that's not really conducive to what it is that you want to do here.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe consult with your learning people before you make all these big purchases. And because of that, it's been really interesting to see. But, for any CLOs out there, advocate for your learner, for your learning team, advocate for them. Give them the proper time to learn themselves, not just go to a conference for 3 days. And I mean, the conferences are fun. They're great. You get to hang out and meet, but it's so much cognitive overload, oh, well, we signed you up for LinkedIn Learning. Go ahead and take whatever courses you want. It's like, well, no. They're great supplementaries, right? But where's the real true upskilling happening? And then give them the time, which no organization, it's always the fight. The battle is always going to be with time and money. But when you prove how valuable it can be just to invest, front load a little bit here and see what happens in the future, like I said, the results are exponential. They're totally worth it.
I am going to tie our conversation in a bow right there. I feel like we've got another 6 hours to unpack here. Lauren, the learning pirate. Sorry, didn't mean to mispronounce your name there. I can't thank you enough for taking the time, your precious time, to speak with us today. I really hope it's not the last time. Maybe next time we can get deeper into the neuroscience, or maybe we can talk about upskilling and what that means. But for today, thank you so much for putting your opinions and your experiences on the table. And I wish you the best.
Thank you so much. I think we should do it. You're a delight. We should totally do this again.
Thanks again for tuning into today's episode of the eLearning Podcast. If you like what you've learned today in this episode, I encourage you to either follow us or subscribe to us on Facebook or Twitter or YouTube. And please do share this episode with 1 or 2 of your colleagues or friends. Also, I just want to remind you that you can level up your online learning game with all of the information that's available at the eLearning Success Summit. You can get your free ticket at elearningsuccesssummit.com. And finally, you can also stay up to date on everything that's important, all the news and the resources for e-learning professionals at lmspulse.com. Get our free newsletter by just going to lmspulse.com today. Thanks again.